Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Yes, Houston, we've had a problem.
It's time to fix election integrity in America. Let's start by identifying the problems that we currently have with election integrity. Let's continue by breaking these problems into two basic areas: process subversion, i.e. messing with the act of voting itself, and influence operations, i.e. shaping the attitudes and actions of voters prior to voting. The term influence operations in this podcast has been applied in a much broader context than its military origins would suggest. Influence operations are any activities designed to shift voter sentiment regarding a candidate for office or policy issue. There are many different ways to conduct influence operations. Some of these ways are perfectly legal, such as candidates appealing to voters to vote for them. Some of these votes are not illegal, but they are indeed suspect in the court of public opinion. And some of these ways are just outright attempts to undermine our system of government. All right, let's dig into this topic a bit further with some background information that will help us to identify and evaluate potential solutions to our election integrity risks. First, we need to realize that election fraud is very, very real, and it doesn't have to be rampant in order to be significant. In today's digital age, it is regular practice during elections to micro-target specific voting blocks to either encourage them or dissuade them from voting altogether. Now, they can also just simply mess with their votes at the polls. We also need to realize that election processes are much more complicated than casting a vote and counting the votes. This complexity results in vulnerabilities that can be and have been exploited by those who intend to subvert our elections. And last of all, we need to recognize that while the exact impact of influence operations may be difficult to isolate, it is undoubtedly significant. All right, secure elections require the successful execution of many unique processes. The details of these processes may vary significantly from state to state, particularly the terms used, but there are some common threads across key election processes that warrant discussion. I've broken down the key processes needed to execute a secure election into 8 different topics. It all starts with voter registration, which results in a voter registration database, also known as a qualified voter file. This voter registration database is a sum total of all citizens who are eligible to vote in an upcoming election. Then there are election day preparation activities such as printing ballots, configuring voting machines, and training poll workers. There are 2 distinct methods for voting, and we address these in unique processes. One is voting at the poll, and the other is voting absentee. While there are indeed some similarities between these different voting processes, there are significant distinctions such as voter identification methods that warrant them to be treated separately. Now, when all votes have been cast and the polls have been closed, there is the all-important task of tallying the votes in a secure manner, and there's a separate process for that. Also, stuff happens. Machines break. Ballots are spoiled. Processes are not followed to the letter. When there are discrepancies, the reconciliations of these discrepancies is supposed to go through its own disciplined process in order to ensure the recording of each voter's vote. Now, upon receiving all the vote tallies and reconciled voting records, elections then follow a process of certification where the results are certified by the governing elected official. And if election results are challenged, the challenge may result in an election recount process which follows its own guidelines as stipulated by state law. The sum total of all these election processes form the core of our election system in America. Not as simple as casting a vote and counting the votes, is it? For your reference, I've created some fairly generic process flow diagrams for each topic that's available for Right Stuff members to download and analyze for themselves. Now that we have all these election processes defined, we have the necessary background information needed to start analyzing how these processes might be subverted, either intentionally or unintentionally. In engineering parlance, we have teed it up for a failure modes and effects analysis, and that's just what I did. Now I'm going to spare you all the long division and cut to the chase. I've identified the following artifacts as critical items in our voting processes. Each one of them needs to be secured in order to ensure the security of each election. If the integrity of any one of these artifacts is breached, it puts the election result at risk of not being fair and accurate. Why is the registered voter database important? Well, if you're not in the voter database, you are not eligible to vote in most states. Furthermore, it contains all the critical information needed to verify that you are who you say you are, which leads us to our next critical artifact, poll books. Poll books break down the statewide registered voter database into precinct-sized chunks. Precincts are the lowest common denominator of voting jurisdictions. When you register to vote, you are assigned a voting precinct, which corresponds to a specific polling location where you go to vote should you vote in person. A single polling location may feature one or more precincts, but each precinct has its own poll book, whether in electronic or paper form. Poll workers at each precinct use the data in each poll book to verify the identity of each voter. If someone tries to vote who is not in the poll book, the voter is issued a provisional ballot, which leads to our next critical artifact, that of provisional ballots. Provisional ballots are tracked separately from regular ballots. Provisional ballots are only supposed to be converted into regular ballots once the voter's identity has been verified. Ballots of all sorts are the lifeblood of elections. Voters cast their votes on ballots, so it kind of makes sense that secure tracking of ballots is very important to the security of any election. Since thousands of people can vote in each precinct and each ballot can feature dozens of voting decisions, machines are used to tabulate these votes for each precinct, so voting machines are a critical artifact as well. Each precinct's vote tally is then shared with a local clerk and county clerk. These precinct tallies are aggregated by these clerks and shared with the public and state election officials. Certification of each election is subject to verifying the integrity of precinct-level control artifacts for the pertinent election question. In addition to these control artifacts, I could have singled out mail as well, since absentee ballots are transferred from voters to clerks via the United States Postal Service, but the integrity of the mail is well beyond the scope of this analysis. All right. One way of summarizing the interrelation of all these critical artifacts is shown in this diagram. The voter database bone is connected to the poll book bone, which is connected to the ballot bone, either provisional or regular, absentee or poll-based. Eventually, all of these valid ballots end up being tabulated in a voting machine. Absentee ballots are collected from the United States Postal Service or ballot drop box in front of the clerk's office. These ballots are fed into this voting machine, which yields a precinct-level vote tally. This vote tally is sealed with other voting artifacts specific to each precinct and submitted to local and county elected officials. The county election official then shares this information with state election officials. In the case of a presidential election, the statewide results initiate designation of electors that then cast their votes for president and vice president. In addition to controlling the status of each control artifact, it is important to track the transfer of information between artifacts. For example, a single ballot might be run through a voting machine multiple times, or the flash drive containing the precinct vote tally might take a detour to another computer before it is sealed into the precinct vote tally envelope, or the vote tally envelope itself might be tampered with during transfer between a polling location and the clerk's office. Security during the transfer of data is equally as important as securing the integrity of individual election artifacts such as poll books and ballots. Now, even if poll workers are very diligent and they're following the security protocols, precinct-level vote tallies pass through many different hands, which brings me to an old adage often attributed to Joseph Stalin. Those who vote decide nothing. Those who count the vote decide everything. All right, sounds pretty simple, right? I believe that you will find that maintaining the integrity of our elections is anything but simple. We'll provide additional details in our engineer version, which is available to Right Stuff members only. Okay, we've addressed the most critical vulnerabilities within our election process. Now let's take a look upstream of the election. Let's look at how influence operations before votes are cast influence the outcomes of our elections. How do influence operations shape the opinions of voters about a given candidate or ballot proposal? Well, first, let's take a look at some examples of some lawful influence operations. The most obvious form of a lawful influence operation is akin to product marketing. The cost of a 30-second spot during the Super Bowl can be over $5 million. The goal, of course, of this advertising is to get consumers to buy the pertinent product. Now, when it comes to elections, this product is a candidate. Candidate committees are formed with the express purpose of electing someone to office. Political parties and issue advocacy organizations often seek to influence voters regarding broader issues of public policy. Movies, TV shows, and musicians are perhaps today's most significant influencers of culture and, subsequently, voter attitudes. One could also make the case that while there are exceptions, that these forms of influence operations are perfectly lawful. Some examples of unlawful influence operations are those which seek to undermine our system of government. Examples of such operations are foreign governments and domestic organizations advocating for the overthrow of our government, often with the assistance of foreign operators. In between, the extreme of lawful and unlawful influence operations are those which fall into a gray area that, for the sake of our discussion, we'll classify as simply unethical. Organizations with this classification sometimes take advantage of special legal privileges granted to them so as to influence people in unethical ways. If we are to protect the integrity of our elections, we must protect the ability of citizens to vote and do so without fear of intimidation or unlawful deception. All right, time to define our objectives regarding election integrity. All right, let's start by breaking these objectives down into three basic categories: before one casts a vote, after one casts a vote, and also enforcement should we find any irregularities. Now, before one casts a vote, I believe most people would agree that we should encourage everyone who is eligible to vote to vote. We should also ensure that each citizen is only able to vote once per election. We need to ensure that the person who completes the ballot is the person registered to complete the ballot, and we need to ensure that only citizens are allowed to vote. We also need to promote civics awareness. We need to secure electorate from influence operations. Now, after one casts a vote, we need to ensure that every vote is counted. Poll voters, absentee voters, as well as those who've been deployed in the military. We need to ensure that every vote is cast only once. We need to ensure that each vote cast is done so in a secure manner that supports a high integrity recount. Now, when things go snafu, we need to make sure that there's enforcement. So around enforcement, we need to systematically investigate precinct by precinct voting irregularities. We need to implement and monitor effective corrective action plans for incidents and negligence. And when there is election fraud, we need to pursue criminal prosecutions. There you have it. You may have additional objectives or a revised list altogether, that's fine. But Build 1.0 of our election integrity solution will be based on these objectives. If you'd like to evaluate a different set of objectives, please share your recommendations in the comment section of this post. I would submit that all of these objectives are equally important as defined. When we evaluate potential election integrity solutions, all of these objectives will have the same weight factor when calculating the final score of each solution. All right, time to identify some solutions that could be implemented to ensure the integrity of our elections. All right, let's start by dividing these solutions into a category for citizens, so i.e. Solutions that citizens can implement, and another category for government that includes solutions that folks in the government can implement. Let's start by looking at potential citizen solutions. Number one, get out and vote. If you don't vote, elected officials won't take your voice seriously. The fewer people who vote, the easier it is for elected officials to focus upon getting their favorite constituency to vote and ignore your voice altogether. Next, register voters. Wouldn't it be nice if 100% of us took our right and responsibility to vote seriously? Elected officials would not be able to take any of their constituents for granted if that were the case. Next, a solid way to ensure that our election processes are not subverted is to work at the polls yourself. Most clerks are desperate to find committed people that are willing to work at the polls in order to ensure fair elections. Next, there's the option of volunteering to be a poll watcher. Or you can serve as a poll challenger, representing an organization dedicated to preserving the integrity of our vote. If you don't have an election integrity organization in your state, form one. That's another solution. Not much into organizing things? No problem. You can still focus upon letting your voice be heard via social media, attending meetings of elected officials, writing letters to the editor, and calling into radio shows. Lastly, as a citizen, you can engage even more directly into our body politic by running for office yourself. Take it from me, there is no better way to get a deep appreciation for the election process and the need to preserve its integrity than by running for office yourself. All right, what solutions can those who have been elected to office do to help ensure our election integrity? All right, let's look at some government solutions. Number one, when we see violations of the law, prosecute. How can we preserve the integrity of our elections if we fail to prosecute violations of the law? Next, create an online dashboard to monitor the quality of the voter registration database. Another solution, require poll voters to show a voter ID. Some people attempt to paint this as a means of suppressing the vote, but no one claims that showing an ID at the airport before boarding a plane suppresses air travel. Another way to protect the integrity of our election is to provide 24/7 monitoring of all critical components of the election system. Open up this monitoring to a third-party watchdog organization or multiple organizations. Whenever there is an indication of malfeasance, be ready with a quick response team to go in and identify what exactly is going on. In this digital age, it is still valuable also to provide a printed verification of electronic tallies to support any recount efforts. Also, it's important to train poll workers. That's another valuable solution. Simple ideas such as the need to separate provisional ballots from verified ballots are among the key concepts that are important to reinforce via training. Another way to protect election integrity is to establish foolproof voter eligibility verification procedures. In order to maintain an accurate voter registration database, how about establishing voter list maintenance cooperation agreements with other states when people move there? You get them off your rolls. Help isolate the influence of big tech on election outcomes by implementing Dr. Robert Epstein's election monitoring system. And in addition to state cooperation agreements, each local jurisdiction should develop and maintain procedures to ensure accurate voter rolls. One last solution for government to implement would be for our federal government to remove Section 230 protections for big tech in context of their predisposition to assume the role of content publisher when they censor political content posted by their users. That's it. That's all the solutions which I propose for Build 1.0 of our election integrity solutions. You may have additional solutions that you'd like to propose. Please do so in the comments section or via our solutions page at letsfixstuff.org. Now it's time to identify which of these solutions best satisfy our objectives. All right, when we score all of our solutions against the objectives that we established earlier, training poll workers rises to the top as the highest priority solution to pursue. Registering voters, well, still having a positive influence on election integrity, in case you're curious, scored last against our objectives. Now, overall, the top three solutions are training poll workers, serving as a poll challenger, and serving as a poll worker. The top three solutions specific to citizens are serving as a poll challenger, serving as a poll worker, and forming an election integrity organization. The top three solutions specific to government are training poll workers, prosecuting violations of the law, and implementing 24/7 monitoring systems for critical components of the election system. There you have it. If you want to fix election integrity, we've given you a good place to start with these solutions. Remember, if you would like to have more details on the topics we discussed, please see our classified engineer version or EV version accessible by Right Stuff members. This MV or media version is open to the public. Let us know how we did and please share it with your personal network as well as your elected representatives. Thank you very much for your support of our mission of data-driven policy solutions at Let's Fix Stuff. Let's go fix our election integrity